Happy Monday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. If you're new here, Balancing the Books is the game where I add up all the books that came onto my TBR in a month with all the books that went off my TBR in a month and try to make those numbers balanced. Before I get into my haul though, the first thing I have to go through is last month we introduced a new rule. So usually what happens is at the end of the month, if those numbers aren't balanced and I hauled more books than I read or DNF'd or gave away, I have to give away books from my TBR so that I balance those out. But last month we made up a new rule from suggestions from you guys, which was that instead I picked the number of books that I needed to get rid of to balance it, but my mission was I had to read them within the next month, and if I didn't manage to read them, then I have to give them away. So we're going to keep that rule because lots of you really liked it. I thought it was fun. We are going to make one more amendment, which was also suggested by you guys, which is that when I get that number, say it's like 2 books I have to get rid of, I can't just pick 2 books that I want to read that month. It has to be the 2 books that I've had on my TBR for the longest. So we'll see if we need that at the end of this month. I don't think we will because I had a pretty good reading month, but you never know. Is anyone still with me? I feel like I've been talking a lot and doing very little. So at the end of October, we were actually 4 books up. I had 4 books I needed to get rid of. So I chose 4 books, but I'm now only holding 3 books because I've lost one. There is one that I didn't get round to reading, and that is called My House is Falling Down. And I didn't read it, so I have to get rid of it, but I now can't find it, and I have a feeling I may have packaged it up and sent it back to my office by mistake with some books that I was intentionally sending to my office. So fun little surprise for them. They will find that book in there. But if I find it at home, I will be giving it to charity because I didn't get around to reading that one. So obviously it wasn't high enough at my priorities. But I did read these other 3. So I read 2 Emma Donoghue books, The Pull of the Stars and Frog Music. They're very, very different from each other than they're both historical, and they are both set during pandemics. This one is set in San Francisco in the 1870s, and there is a smallpox epidemic going on, though that's not the main focus of the story, but it is kind of there in the background. The story itself is based on a true story about the murder of a woman called Jenny Bonnet, or Bonnet, who always dressed as a man, and it's this unsolved crime, and so Emma Donoghue has invented a story around these characters, and I really, really enjoyed it. It uses a fun timeline of flashing back and forwards before and after the murder, so yeah, it was just like really, really engaging. Then Pull of the Stars, this one is set during the Great Flu 100 years ago, and it's set on a maternity ward in a hospital. So it all takes place over 3 days, and we get to see lots of very gruesome birth scenes, which I did not enjoy because I'm very squeamish, and I also already really hate the idea of carrying children. So I did find myself getting very squeamish about this one, but it was brilliant. Emma Donoghue in general is just a fantastic writer. I've loved everything of hers that I've read. This one also had a female-female love story, which is always a plus for me, although I have to say I didn't like the way this one ended. I'm not going to give spoilers, but it ended in a way that we often see and wasn't what I wanted from this. But overall, 2 really, really great historical fiction novels. I love her writing and I feel like I learnt loads. There's loads in both of these books that I kept talking to people about. So really recommend. The final one that I picked was this book, Family of Origin by C.J. Hauser. And this book has kind of a funny history with me in that I've had it for so long and never read it. And so often in Balancing the Books, when I would get to the stage where I needed to unhaul some books, I would pick up this one and last minute I would decide I wasn't quite ready to give it away. I still wanted to give it a chance, but then I kept not reading it. And I think it was like 3 times I almost gave this one away in Balancing the Books. So when we came up with the new rule last time that I just had a month to read them before giving them away, this was the obvious choice. This was finally its time to shine. And after all of that, I DNF'd this book. But I didn't just DNF it, I DNF'd it like 4 times. There's something about this book that kept making me want to give it another chance. So I'd be reading, I'd be completely fed up, and I'd be like, you know what, I'm not enjoying this book, slam it shut, throw it down, DNF. And then half an hour later I'd be like, okay, I'll just read a little bit more. And I did that like 4 times, and I honestly got so close to the end. I honestly think I was like here-ish when I finally decided to DNF it for good because I just couldn't be bothered to read the last few pages, which is not a good sign. It's a very strange story about a pair of half-siblings whose father has just died, and he was involved in this kind of scientific cult who believed that evolution was going backwards. It's not very interesting. I thought that story could be very quirky and engaging, but actually I was just very, very bored with everything that was going on with ducks. It's all about them looking at ducks and seeing whether they're evolving backwards or not. And then there's also a very, very strange relationship going on with these siblings, which is an incestuous relationship. It is revealed halfway through that they are not related. They're not half siblings. They're not blood related at all. So it's, you know, uncomfortable, but it was interesting. But I don't recommend this book because I DNF'd it so many times. Right, that brings me back to 44 books to begin November with. That is the number we're aiming to balance. Let's start with my November book haul because it was quite a large one. In November, I hauled 12 books, but let's go through those and see which of them I read so I can take off the TBR. The first book I hauled was Necessary People. This was one that RG bought me as a surprise. We made a whole vlog about him controlling my cozy reading night, which I will link to. It was really fun. He chose my outfit, my food, and my book. And I did read this one, so it's off the list, and I really, really enjoyed it. He did a great job. So this is about a girl who has always been really, really jealous of her friend. She has this kind of much richer, more glamorous, beautiful, desirable friend, and they've always been in competition with each other. But our main character, whose name is Violet, has kind of like absorbed herself into Stella, the other girls' family. She lives in an apartment that Stella's family rent. They spend all their holidays together. Violet's basically just always following Stella around. But then when they graduate, Violet ends up getting this really good, like, high-profile job in TV, and she loves it, and she kind of steps out of Stella's shadow and is like making a name for herself. And then Stella follows her and gets a job there, and they're instantly back in competition. And I was just really enjoying it. So for the first half, it's like quite slow, nothing's really happening, but I was so engaged the whole way through because I just loved reading this dynamic, and it had a lot of tension that something was going to happen. And then as you get towards the end, I almost started to lose interest in it because I started to think, why is she just letting this girl be like this? And then suddenly it takes this dark twist, and not in the way that I expected. It has a very, very interesting ending that just leaves you being entirely unsettled about what you just read. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. The next book I hauled was Heartburn by Nora Ephron. I had that one on my Kindle, and I was really, really excited about this one because people bloody love this book, and I didn't like it at all. So I have read it. There were definitely parts that were funny, but I don't see why this one is such a beloved book. And what was interesting is that actually I read it with my book club, and basically all of us didn't like it. Pretty much all of us didn't like it. But everyone I've seen online talk about this book loves it. It's written by Nora Ephron, so I think if it was a movie I might have liked it more. You can definitely see a lot of Nora Ephron's characters in it, like Meg Ryan could have been the main girl. But as a book, I just found it a little bit exhausting. The main character kind of talks like she's a stand-up comedian, and it's like she doesn't pause for breath. So every time I got to the end of the chapter, it was like, I honestly was like tired. It was like, thank God she stopped talking for a fucking second so that I can catch my breath. And it was also very dated. There's a lot of anti-feminist stuff in there. There's a lot of homophobic words and ideas being used. There was just a lot that felt very jarring and very dated. But there were funny moments, and it was a moving story overall about a woman coping with her husband's infidelity and the way he treats her afterwards. I mean, he's just awful. Yeah, I mean, it was fine. I felt fine about it, but like less than fine, in that I actively didn't like it. Next, I hauled The Deal of a Lifetime by Fredrik Backman, and I have read this one. I read it all in one go. It's a very, very short book. I hauled this one because I am doing the Love-Hate Challenge with Emma Tobias, which you will see very, very soon at the end of this week. And the theme is Christmas books, but I realised I hadn't read that many Christmas books. So I had to read some for ideas, and I picked this one because it's got a Christmas tree on the cover, but it turns out it's nothing to do with Christmas. I think right at the beginning in the first line it says it's Christmas Eve, and then other than that, it's nothing to do with Christmas. So that was disappointing. But before I tell you my reaction to the book itself, if you do want to not have spoilers for the Love-Hate Challenge, because those videos aren't up yet, then just like skip forward a little bit. I'll put my hand up like this while I'm giving spoilers, and when I put it down, you're safe. So putting my hand up now so that you can go away. Okay, assuming they've gone. I did not like this book. No, I thought it was very disappointing and very boring and very bad, which is a shame because I love Fredrik Backman. I'm a huge Fredrik Backman fan, and this one just did nothing for me. It felt like it was a book that was trying to make a very profound point and ended up making absolutely no point, and I've already forgotten what it was even about. Okay, you can come back now. We're all safe here. The next book I hauled was The Imposter by Anna Wharton, and this one I have not read yet, so this one stays on the TBR. This is one I've been excited about for a long time. I included this in a book break video on most anticipated books, like all the way back in May, I think. So this one is about a woman who has always been really interested in this newspaper story of a girl who went missing and was never found, but whose parents have never ever given up looking for her. So she's always been interested in that story. And then one day, when things aren't going great in her own life, she doesn't know where she's going to live, she sees an ad advertising for a lodger. And the ad is from this family. The family still looking for their missing child. So she sees the perfect opportunity to get closer to the story that she's so interested in. But I'm guessing she's going to discover all sorts of weird things going on in the story, and I can't wait to read it. Then I hauled 6 books for my Taylor Swift challenge. They were Charlotte's Web, Stargirl, Let It Snow, Normal People, The Great Gatsby, and on Audible I hauled Furious Love by some people. For my full thoughts, you can go and watch the Taylor Swift vlog. I will link it below, and you can see all of my reactions in real time. But they are all now off my TBR. I read all of these 5 and then I did DNF the audiobook just because it's not a topic that particularly interests me. That one is a non-fiction about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, so I was enjoying it, listening to the audiobook while baking some cookies that turned out to be disappointing, but at the end of my baking experience I didn't really have any desire to keep listening to the audiobook, so I have returned that one. And these ones I all thought were okay, so I said in the Taylor Swift video that I think me and Taylor Swift don't really have the same taste in books, but I didn't dislike any of them or many of them. Great Gatsby I gave a 3 out of 5. I thought it was a sad, good story. I'm glad I read it. It's a classic that I'd never read before, but I don't think it's one that will stick with me, and I wasn't like super engaged as I was going. Let It Snow, I just read the one story written by John Green and felt nothing for it. I didn't like that one. Stargirl I thought was okay. This is a book people bloody love. I probably would have loved it if I read it as a teenager, but as an adult I found it a little bit embarrassing. Charlotte's Web I did read and love as a child, and as an adult I read it and liked it, but felt very sad and then resentful that it made me very sad. And Normal People was the one that I would say was the biggest success. I did really like this one. I've now loved both Sally Rooney's books, and I'm probably the last person left on earth to have read them. At first I didn't think I was going to like this book because it is so inherently dependent on the idea of miscommunication and people just not speaking to each other and just not telling each other how they feel or what they mean, and that is something that I just hate in books and movies. It drives me mad. So at first I thought I was going to find this book really frustrating, but then I did get into it and ended up loving it, and both of these characters are really sad, interesting people. Particularly Marianne is a very sad character, and I found that I really loved her by the end of the book, and their miscommunications made sense because their characters were fleshed out enough for me to understand why they were like this. I think maybe the reason I don't like the trope usually is because it doesn't fit with the characters. It doesn't make sense that they wouldn't just clear that misunderstanding up, whereas with these two people I did believe that they would let themselves go down these really sad paths. So yeah, I did love this one. Quick interruption from me here. So when I did my first ever Balancing the Books, which was like almost 4 years ago now, there was a point where I hadn't realised that the camera had stopped recording, the audio was still going, and so I had to like reenact the video. Nearly 4 years later, I haven't learnt my lesson because I just did it again. Luckily it was only for like a minute this time, so the only thing that we missed in that video was me saying the next book I hauled was my most exciting book mail of the year. Literally like screamed when this came through the door. I was not expecting it, and that was Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So Taylor Jenkins Reid, of course, you will have heard of because the whole of BookTube is obsessed with her. She's the author of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. I'm pretty certain that's everything you missed. Let's go back to me explaining what this book is about. Mick Reaver, who is one of the 7 husbands of Evelyn Hugo, this book is about Mick Reaver's children, and Mick Reaver appears at some points in this book. It's dual timeline. Part of it is set all in one day, the day of this big party at the Reaver house being held by the 4 adult children. The other timeline watches Mick and his first wife meeting, these children being born, their relationship falling apart, the children growing up. So we get like a whole kind of lifetime intercut with this one very dramatic day. So I think this book had all the things that Taylor Jenkins Reid is great at. I loved the celebrity world that she created, I loved the little Easter eggs from the other books. She's really good at relationships and family dynamics, and I loved all the emotion there. This one just wasn't as unique as the other two, Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones. Daisy Jones in particular is a very unique book. It's written as transcripts of interviews. Like, it's very cool. It really plays with the form of what a novel is. This one is kind of closer to some of her earlier books that I've read, in that it's just a nice moving story. So I do really, really recommend this one if you're a Taylor Jenkins Reid fan, definitely, but just don't expect the next big Evelyn Hugo Daisy Jones novel. This is more of a kind of companion book set in that world for people who are already big fans. And then the last book that I hauled was this one, Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stuart. This is one that I haven't yet read, but I'm very excited to. It just won the Booker Prize. This is one that we published at Macmillan, where I work, so there was a lot of excitement on Booker night. I think this one's going to give me a little life vibes. It's supposed to be very, very sad. It sounds very sad. It's about a young boy growing up in Glasgow with an alcoholic mother who he completely adores and who loves him, but that isn't enough to save her from her addiction and her unhappy marriage. The boy is also gay and growing up, coming to terms with what that means for him and how people see him in the place and time that he lives. So I think it is going to be a very moving one. I've heard a lot about this book, people are absolutely loving it, people saying that it's just too sad. I might just find it too sad, but we will see. I'm nervous and excited to read this one. So all of that means that of the 12 books I hauled this month, I actually only have 2 of them left on my TBR. But let's see if we can get that number down even more from the other books that I read this month. So right at the beginning of November was the Thousand Doors Readathon I was a host for. I will link to the whole playlist of videos there so you can go and see what that was all about. But I read a bunch of books for that. I read Pages for Her by, what's her name? Sylvia Brownrigg. I did know that. I don't know why that went out of my head. This is the sequel to Pages for You. Pages for You was actually written like 20 years earlier than this one, but I just read them both almost in a row this year, so I didn't have to have the excruciating wait, and I'm so glad. I loved both of these books. So Pages for You is about the beginning and ending of a relationship between 2 women who meet at university. One of them is a student, one of them is a graduate professor, something like that. So like a little bit of an age gap, but not a huge one. And it's really moving and really emotional, and it hurt my heart in a big way. So I read that one a little bit earlier this year, and then for the readathon I read the sequel, Pages for Her, which is about them much later in life reuniting for the first time, and they're both have moved on and been in relationships with men ever since, and it's about what happens when they reunite. And I loved it. It was honestly everything I wanted and more. If I'd been waiting for 20 years, I would have been thrilled with this. Luckily, I was only waiting for a few months, and I was still thrilled with it. I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, not an Emma book, you would really think, but one that everyone talks about, and I just always wanted to know what the fuss was about, and I really enjoyed it, a lot more than I thought I would. I don't know if I will be going on with the series right now, at least, because this is still sci-fi and very outside my comfort zone, but it is very funny. I found it genuinely very funny, and I think I said in my readathon vlog that for this one, it was really the humour that kept me interested. It wasn't the characters, the setting, or the plot. None of that I cared about. I just liked the jokes. And then the last one I read for the readathon was Kindred by Octavia Butler, which was absolutely brilliant. I gave this one 5 stars. I was nervous about it because I've read one Octavia Butler before, Parable of the Sower, and I did not like it at all. Really was not for me. So I wasn't sure how I'd get on, but Kindred is amazing. So this is about a girl who starts time traveling. She suddenly gets thrown back in time. So she is a 26-year-old black woman living in the 70s. Just checked that. I was about to say the 90s, but that's wrong. She's living in the 70s, and she's thrown back in time to 1815, where she meets a young white boy who is drowning, I think the first time she meets him, and she has to save his life. And this keeps happening. She keeps going back to her present day and then being thrown back again at various points in this boy's life and having to save him. But of course, the time that she's being thrown back to is a time when slavery still existed, and so her life is very much in danger. Whenever she's back in time, she's seen as lesser, she is horribly treated by the white people, often including this boy growing up who she's trying to save. And as the book goes on, she learns the significance of who this boy is and why he's relevant to her, and it's a lot to read. There are some really, really harrowing scenes in here, but I just thought it was brilliant. This is an example of exactly the kind of science fiction that I like, where it's very, very light on the sci-fi and much more on playing with the relationships and dynamics that spring up because of this. Is anyone else exhausted? I'm exhausted. The final book that I read in November is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. This book is why I love Fredrik Backman. Deal of a Lifetime was not for me, but this one is brilliant. So this is a very, very funny, very silly book about a bank robbery that goes wrong, and the bank robber accidentally ends up holding some people hostage after running away from the scene of crime. All of the characters in here are completely absurd, and so the whole thing is completely laugh out loud, ridiculous, but also very, very moving. And that's what Fredrik Backman is great at, is that while making you laugh the whole way, there are so many really, really touching moments in here. Towards the end, I would say there were maybe a little too many touching moments. It got a little bit cheesy, sickly sweet at some points, which, you know, could have toned it down a little bit, and if I was being fussy, I would like deduct from it being 5 stars because of that, but I am not that fussy, or at least I can't be bothered to record my thoughts in that fussy a way, so I gave this one 5 stars. I really recommend. It's silly and sweet and uplifting. I think we're finished now. The only other thing I wanted to say was these books. So if you watched last month, you will know that I was like halfway through these books and I put them back on my shelf, and I think I'm going to officially like take them off my TBR because I love having these ones up on my shelf. This is Bookworm and the Gifts of Reading. They're 2 lovely books about books, but I'm not really counting them as like books that are on my TBR. They're not books that I'm actively telling myself to read. I think they're going to be things that over the course of my life I sometimes pull down and read a little chapter from, so it didn't really make sense for them to be on my actual like TBR, my list of things that I'm supposed to be working my way through. So I'm going to take those 2 off too, which means that I think I've done very well. I slightly lost count as I went, but I think I am -4 in the good way. I think I've got rid of 4 more books even than I need to, and so I don't have to balance anything. In fact, if I wanted, I could just go buy 4 books right now, but I won't do that. That's not the point of this. I've literally been talking for so long that the lighting on screen has just got darker and darker, which is a good sign that I need to wrap things up. So do leave the moon emoji below if you got this far to show that it is now the middle of the night, apparently. And if you feel like it, leave me a comment letting me know your favourite things that you read or hauled this month. And I will see you guys next time. Here's my end screen.